This is the Little Moments Count radio podcast, created in partnership with community radio stations throughout Minnesota. Each episode, you'll hear interviews with early childhood experts on how to support the important brain development that takes place in the first 1,000 days of life, just through little moments every day. Learn more at littlemomentscount.org/podcast.
It's a good day to be Indigenous.
Get up, stand up.
They are going to become more brutal.
Couldn't cut, hit me cut again.
Because all the hippies were trying to be Indians anyway.
They're going to become more repressive because it's a matter of dollars and their illusionary concepts of power.
Hey, Victor.
We must live in balance with the earth.
And also with recent happenings at Wounded Knee.
I am awake.
Welcome to Native Roots Radio presents I'm Awake, and I'm your host, Wakanja Hade. Hey, Kadagi to all my friends and relatives in four directions. You are listening to Native Roots Radio presents I'm Awake, and I'm your host, Robert Pilot. And we discuss local and national Native news and events. And as you know, Haley, Native issues are human issues, and human issues are Native issues.
They are, Robert. This episode of Native Roots Radio is presented in partnership with Little Moments Count. Little Moments Count is a statewide collaborative focused on helping parents and caregivers learn about the importance of brain development in the first 3 years of life.
Yes. And we are honored to have Dr. Zimmerman on again. And we had an awesome show a few months ago, and I'm really excited to have Dr. Zimmerman back on. And I just want to say that she's a co-principal investigator and senior director of policy and programs at the National Native Children's Trauma Center, NNCTC. She's also a former tribal senior policy advisor at the OJJDP, Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. Welcome, Doctor. So good to see you again.
Nice to see you too. Thank you for having me back.
Well, let's get into it. We have a lot of issues to talk about here, and we talk a little bit about we talk a lot about trauma, and we talk a lot about in Indian country how our families have been affected by it, whether it's boarding school, which I read recently that everybody has been affected by boarding school that's Native American,
Right.
One way or another, and but also the healing. And I think that's what we'd really like to talk about with you is all the great work you're doing with the healing with our children, and just the positive things that are happening. And let's talk a little bit about that today.
Okay.
Well,
Go ahead.
Sorry about that. I have a quick question. As a co-principal investigator at the National Native Children's Trauma Center, could you share some insights into specific challenges faced by Native American children and families regarding positive childhood experiences and
Sure.
adverse childhood experiences?
Sure. So just a quick reminder about the adverse childhood experiences study that got the conversation going in the late 90s, talking about the impact of adverse experiences on well-being in early childhood, on well-being throughout the lifespan. And so the work that we do is trying to intervene from 0 to 18. And the work that we do is very much about identifying trauma. Not because if everything is trauma, then nothing's trauma. So being able to, how do we identify those children and youth and adults who are being impacted by their trauma histories? The other is to be able to identify or understand the impact on child development, on adolescent development, and even into adulthood as we age. The impact on relationships and the ability to, for instance, gain friends or maintain friends, the ability to engage in and sustain a romantic, loving relationship, the impacts of parenting for a parent whose has a trauma history and who is struggling to parent and doesn't know why. So we're looking at those negative impacts, but also it's not a life sentence. We know that we can heal from trauma. And we now know some of the research out there is telling us that healing can come through our cultural ways, through our spirituality, but also the research is beginning to show that positive childhood experiences can truly offset the impacts of adverse childhood experiences. So it's important to really pay attention to that, and it makes it community-wide. We've all heard the saying, "It takes a village to raise a child." Well, all of us can play a role in the healing of our individual family members, our families, and our communities, and that's really the great news. Positive childhood experiences are experiences in childhood that really build a child's sense of belonging or connection, and that's really what trauma does. It really disrupts connection. It disrupts attachment. It disrupts relationships, and that's a big piece of how we build resilience in children. And it's really about building those connections, prioritizing relationships. What does that look like? Fostering a sense of well-being with them, helping them practice taking care of themselves physically and finding a sense of purpose within their families and within their communities. I think that what is interesting in child development is that during adolescence, it's a time when we pull away from our parents, right? And we begin to have our own individual thoughts. We begin to become our own person. Well, in tribal communities or communities that indigenous communities that have a collective way of being, we are pulling away, but we're not just stepping away, but we're stepping into our role, the role that we'll play in our family, the role that we'll play in our communities. And so that it gives us a sense of purpose, and that really builds resilience with our kids. And it helps them find and move towards their goals, and gives them opportunities for some self-discovery.
So I have a question. So how do we get our young ones involved in this? Because if they're young, sometimes the parents are a roadblock because, I know me being 62 years old, my parents didn't believe in certain things, whether it was therapy or medication or anything like that. And I see that still at times. How do we reach, and how do they reach that place where they can get help for their children?
Sure. So just knowing that it may not necessarily have to be a long-term therapeutic method that's used, although that can be very helpful. We like to say at the Trauma Center that relationship is really the evidence-based treatment model for all trauma, healthy, connected relationships. So, for instance, if you think of the early childhood programs in your communities, whether that's Early Head Start or you're funded through ACF to provide 0 to 3, that's identifying those people in the community that can help that 0 to 3-year-old develop in a loving, nurturing, safe environment where they feel not just physically safe, but psychologically safe. And again, as they age Head Start, and then developing those relationships with schools, particularly in high school, where there's a necessary need to feel connected, and helping those adults understand how important they are and how important their roles are in the lives of children 0 to 18. As they get older, helping the youth identify at least 2 people outside of their families that, they feel gives a care about them. That could be a Boy Scout leader. It could be a coach. It could be an English teacher. It could be their Uncle Bernie or the Auntie Sarah, anybody that, just helps them feel. And then helping them grow as good friends themselves, being able to be good friends to their friends, and being able to identify good friends as a good start.
Perfect. Hey, this is Native Roots Radio, and we're here with Dr. Zimmerman. who's the co-principal investigator and senior director of policy and programs at the National Native Children's Trauma Center. We're going to come right back here and talk a little bit more. And I want to kind of ask a little bit about what happens sometimes to our young ones that check out, maybe puberty time or 12 or 13 years old. It seems like they really get maybe in touch with their feelings and of their trauma and things like that. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that when we come back.
Okay, sounds great.
Right. Hey, you're listening to Native Roots Radio Presents I'm Awake.
Stay with us.
You're listening to Native Roots Radio. This is Spirit from Reservation Dogs. Get up and listen.
Welcome back to Native Roots Radio Presents I'm Awake, and this is Robert Pilot.
This episode of Native Roots Radio is presented in partnership with Little Moments Count. Hey, Robert, did you know that nearly 80% of brain growth happens in the first 1,000 days? And small moments of interaction like talking, playing, reading, and singing help create the pathways that build a child's brain during this early stage of life?
No, I didn't, but I just read that here too. That's awesome.
Yes, and you can find more information at littlemomentscount.org.
Hey, we're here with Dr. Zimmerman, who is a co-principal investigator and senior director of policy and programs at the National Native Children's Trauma Center. And we've been talking a lot about trauma, but I'd also kind of want to switch a little bit here, and maybe we can go into, because time is going so quick, I want to know, how does positive childhood experience research contribute to the development of trauma-informed practices, especially within Indigenous communities? That's something that really sounds interesting.
Well, I might sound like I'm talking in circles, but let me begin. So we have known that our culture has played a role in our healing for centuries, right? And so I can remember talking with tribal leaders who would say to federal funders or state funders, why don't you let us do what we know to do to heal? And why won't you fund that? Why do we have to have these evidence-based treatment models that you guys always want to push on us that we don't identify with or that don't fit in our communities or with our people? So a big piece of the positive childhood experiences, in my opinion, this is just an opinion, can be those sorts of activities or experiences that we can create for our children and our youth. Everything from helping our children get their spirit name or their Indian name, their tribal name, teaching them the tribal ways of connecting to the spiritual world and how to pray, for, even like learning how to smudge, if that's the cultural ways of your tribe, learning how to reach out to elders or spiritual leaders or cultural teachers in a respectful way. I believe that some of the young people that you were talking about before we went on break, those young adolescents, start to check out because they just don't know where to go. They just haven't had the guidance of where to go to ask for help, understanding their tribal history, making sure that you as a provider connect with the local schools, because connection to the schools is a big piece of feeling of a positive experiences for our kids. I like to think about so I am Nakota and Dakota, and I like to think about how thinking about contemporary coup stories, right? So what does that look like? How we mastered something, how we grew from, resilience is really bouncing back or adapting to adverse experiences and sometimes even growing from it. So helping the youth learn the impacts of trauma on their body, on their thinking and their feeling, helping them identify their triggers, and then helping them also learn coping skills and strategies so that when they become dysregulated and or they're impacted by a sight, a sound, a smell, physical contact, or a posturing of an adult, that they can go into mindfulness or breathing or meditation or step away and create and find ways to feel safe again.
Yeah, that sounds great. And what I hear over and over again, and during the show and also today, is like community, whether it's our elders, whether it's Take a Village, where a lot of people are brought up by their grandmas and
hmm
aunties, and there's all those things that make us strong, but also are difficult too.
Yeah, exactly. And we do know the research shows that the decreasing the negative experiences or the traumatic experiences is really helpful, but almost even more important is the increasing the positive experiences. So the
Mm,
positive experiences test asks about uh, 8 or 9 questions, and it asks people or adolescents or even children before the age of 18. I was able to talk to a family member about my feelings, felt that my family stood by me during difficult times. I
mm.
enjoyed participating in community traditions. I felt a sense of belonging in high school. I felt supported by friends. I had at least 2 non-parent adults who took a genuine interest in me, and I felt safe and protected by adults in my household. So you can see that the more of those positive experiences that a child can have, it can really go a long way in buffering the impacts of adverse experiences.
Yeah, and to remember those experiences too,
hmm
because sometimes you get in that dark hole and you go, well, wait a minute, I have these friends that really listen to me and
Right.
support me, even if maybe my parents don't or can't or unable
hmm
to. That's important. And I'm just thinking back in my
hmm
my childhood, because there was a lot of macho men stuff where, you're not feeling
Yeah.
that way, don't cry. And it's just like, I
Right.
was one of those people that would do the opposite because I felt like if I would cry, I would never stop.
Absolutely. Yeah. And wherever, and we can find, I mean, it's just, again, relationship, really being connected with someone that cares about what you think, feel, and also creating a safe place for,
Mm.
children, whether that's a schoolroom or a playground or your grandma's house, just knowing not just that they're physically safe, but psychologically safe.
Right. In my experience too, as a former high school teacher too, with these small communities and with having an all native homeroom and things like that, if you're there and consistent, the walls will be broken down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's another, a key thing for people that are working with children, youth, or even adults, depending on what capacity your working is to remember that that you are a safe uh, and thoughtful, caring person, but that person may have the person that you're working with, that child or youth, may not doesn't know that, and so some of their behaviors can be off-putting, and some of their
Mhm.
behaviors can be really challenging, but they don't know that, and they have to test that. They have to make sure that they're safe in your presence.
Right. And they do test, let me tell you.
Yes, they do.
I got to tell you a quick story, and I'm going to
Sure.
make it really quick. So I had a native student who did my announcements and who was my go-to person, and she was very smart and she was she was a good person and doing well, but kids were jealous of her too,
hmm
and they thought that she was a favorite of mine, and I always said, well, she was a favorite of mine because she does the right thing, and the year after she graduated, we were at a powwow, a school powwow, and they said, "Hey, she's down there in the gym looking for you." And I said, "Well, I don't really care because you're my kids now." And she wasn't even in the building; they were just testing me.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
wow. They
and they've
are
since
good.
and they've since graduated, and I've been to their graduations and reminded them of that
Yes.
story, and all I got back was a big smile, like, "Yes, you caught us," or whatever, because it was funny. Because that's the
Yes.
way it is. It's like, being a teacher for 30 years, knowing that you have to meet people where they're at, and sometimes
Absolutely.
it's difficult to know where they're at.
Absolutely, which is what we talked about in the earlier presentation of understanding what the function of the behavior is that's happening in
Mm,
front of you with that child, that youth, that student, that patient, that client, and really understanding that it may be based in trauma, and it's to not take it personally and to learn how to create safety in your presence.
we're winding down here, and I always feel really good about our conversation, and I'm sure our audience is really interested in but looking ahead, what are some of the key priorities in the future directions of this field of trauma-informed care?
I really do believe that the positive childhood experiences is going to gain a lot of traction, mostly because we can intervene in the life of a child or a youth with very, very, it's low cost, high impact just by developing strong relationships. I think that's going to be a big piece of the conversation. And really understanding the epigenetics of trauma is probably going to be something that we learn a lot more about, so that I know I think a lot about why my people struggle with diabetes or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease when they've never smoked, those sorts of things. I really do think that some of our chronic diseases in our tribal communities are directly related to the epigenetics of trauma.
Absolutely. And then we only got a little bit of time left here, but I want to leave us with that it's community, and we need to listen to everybody in our youth. And when they do say something, listen to them, right, Doctor? That's
right. They know what they're experiencing, and if you let them tell you the truth, they will.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I hopefully we can make this a every couple month thing, because this was too quick and too fun. I hope you appreciate us on here as much as we appreciate you, because this is amazing information that not only our Native communities should listen to, but all our listeners out there, because trauma is involved in everything, but we're really focusing on the great work that you're doing, and I really appreciate you being on, Dr. Zimmerman.
Okay, well, thank you so much for another invitation.
All right, cool. Hey, this is Native Roots Radio. If you're listening to the show, you're part of the resistance. From Chief Plenty Coups, the ground on which we stand on is sacred ground. It is the blood of our ancestors. We need to resist, divest, join a group, run for office, vote, do solar. We're still here. We are the 7th generation.
And free Leonard Peltier now.
Thanks for listening to the Little Moments Count radio podcast in partnership with community radio stations throughout Minnesota. You can find the Little Moments Count radio podcast wherever you get your podcasts and at littlemomentscount.org/podcast.